Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our online policy forum. We're just waiting for a few more participants to join us. We will start in a few minutes.
While we are waiting, a few reminders. Please ensure your microphones are muted throughout the presentations. If you have any questions for our speakers, you can type them in the chat box and we will address them during our panel discussions and open forum later. We also encourage you to be active in the chat and share your insights on today's topics. And lastly, we would also like to remind everyone that the whole duration of the policy forum is recorded. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to our policy forum titled Legal Approaches to Conservation, setting the policy context for the sustainable management of coastal and marine natural capital in the Western Philippines. I'm Jamela Arizapa.
And I'm Christian Ray Bandia, and we are going to be the moderators for this afternoon's Policy Forum.
Now that we have a good number of attendees, we will now formally start our program. To start, it is our pleasure to introduce to all of you the Director of the UPLB-INREM, Dr. Juan M. Pulhin, who will give us the welcoming remarks and an overview of our objectives for today's forum. Dr. Pulhin, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jam. To our distinguished resource speakers from the legal sector, panelists from both the academe and the national government agencies, and the various participants representing different stakeholders, a pleasant afternoon to all of you. It is indeed my great honor to welcome everyone to this online policy forum titled Legal Approaches to Conservation, Setting the Policy Context for the Sustainable Management of Coastal and Marine Natural Capital in the Western Philippines. The West Philippine Sea is not only a vital ecological treasure, but also a cornerstone of our nation's food security, livelihoods, and cultural identity. Its coral reefs, fisheries, and coastal habitats provide immense benefits, many of which are not captured in traditional economic measures. This is why linking conservation law and natural capital accounting is very crucial. Together, they help us safeguard marine ecosystems through clear governance frameworks, while also ensuring that their true economic, social, and cultural values are recognized in decision making. Today's discussion is both timely and essential. The challenges we face, ranging from resource depletion and competing maritime claims to the impacts of climate change, require innovative solutions that combine sound legal instruments and evidence based policy tools. By understanding the legal approaches that provide the foundation for sustainable management, we move a step closer to ensuring that the wealth of the West Philippine Sea is protected for the present and future generations of the Filipino people. We are honored today to be joined by our distinguished resource persons who will share their insights on the legal approaches towards the conservation of our seas. Allow me to acknowledge Attorney Raywell Realin from the UP Institute of Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea, or IMLOS, and Attorney Pritchilin Q. Palmieri from the Department of Social Forestry and Forest Governance of the UPLB College of Forestry and Natural Resources, who is also affiliated as the Executive Director of the Tanggol Kalikasan. Later, our Attorney Raywell will share the insights on existing legal and policy regime for maritime resource valuation, assessment, and accounting in the West Philippine Sea. This will be followed by Attorney Pritz's discussion on the multi-sectoral approaches towards conservation and environmental justice. To deepen the conversation, we are also joined by our panel of discussants representing the academe and the national government agency, whose reflections will connect today's insights with the real-world context and future action. We envision this policy forum to provide a platform to discuss relevant discourses on the existing laws and policies surrounding the Western Philippines coastal and marine ecosystems and how natural capital accounting can be applied to address as a tool for sustainable policy development. In doing this, we hope to achieve three main things. First, we want to bring everyone in the same page about why it matters to recognize the value of nature in our decisions. Policies often focus on numbers and budgets, but we need to show that our ecosystems, the coral reefs, mangroves, fisheries, and coastal resources of the West Philippine Sea are just as valuable, if not more, to the well-being of our communities and our economy. Second, we aim to take a closer look at our existing laws and policies. Where are the strengths? Where are the gaps? By identifying this, we can see what's working and what needs to be improved when it comes to managing our coastal and marine ecosystems. And third, we want this forum to serve as a platform for collaboration. We have people here today from the government, the academe, as well as from the civil society, and probably even from the private sector. This is our chance to listen to each other's concerns and ideas and make sure that future policy recommendations reflect not just one voice, but the multiple voices of the different stakeholders. I am hoping that with this webinar, we will serve as a platform to open policy discourses on the sustainable management of our seas, leading to actionable pathways for marine conservation and sustainable development. Again, I welcome you all and thank everyone for being part of this important conversation. Good afternoon once again to everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Pulhin, for that insightful welcome remarks and overview. So I hope you were able to download our official Zoom background because before we proceed to our forum proper, we would like to request everyone to open their cameras for a photo op. So I would like to request PJ to facilitate the picture taking.
So, good afternoon everyone. Ayan, nantayin po natin yung mga iba po nating participant to open their cameras. So, ayan, open na po natin. So, yung first panel po, ngiti po tayo. Ang kasunod po, yung kasunod po din. And, ayan, okay na po. Thank you po.
Okay, thank you, PJ, and thank you everyone for participating in the photo opportunity. So now, to delve into our first topic, we have Attorney Rayuel Realin from the University of the Philippines Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea. Attorney Realin will be discussing the existing legal and policy regime for marine resources. He will also be shedding light on the PENCAS Act, key policy issues and national frameworks related to the management of the West Philippine Sea. But before we give Attorney Realin the floor, let me read his bio note. Attorney Rayuel Realin is affiliated with the University of the Philippines Institute for Maritime Affairs and Law of the Sea, or UP-INREM, where he contributes to research and policy discussions on marine resource management and governance. He is engaged as project technical specialist for the Reinvest WPS project, focusing on the legal and policy frameworks governing coastal and marine ecosystems. His work with the UPM laws highlights the intersection of legal and policy reform, sustainable development, and environmental justice, particularly in the context of the West Philippine Sea. So, Attorney Realin, we are now ready for your presentation.
Thank you, Christian, for that introduction. I'd just like to confirm if my audio is clear. Uh,
Yes po.
so do let me know if there are any connectivity issues. But please let me proceed with my presentation this afternoon. So I'd just like to start off by the opening remarks by Dr. Pulin earlier actually reminded me of what we do in Reinvest. Later on, I'll give everyone an idea on how we do our research and how we work with other teams. But one of my takeaways there is that being responsive with respect to um, environmental justice in our seas, particularly in the West Philippine Sea, is an interdisciplinary undertaking. So um, the two speakers for this afternoon, including myself, have legal backgrounds, but important in our work under Reinvest is collaborating with other fields of discipline. So we work with the MSI, Marine Science Institute. We work with INREM. And later on, you'll see it in my presentation that it's not just a legal perspective, but rather an economic perspective, a scientific perspective that is needed to have this understanding. So next slide, please. So I'd like to begin my presentation by sharing recent incidents that adversely affect marine resources in Philippine waters. So I've only identified three. I'm sure there are a lot more, but just to put everything into context, so I've identified overfishing and declining fish stocks. Second, exploitation of marine resources. And third, significant maritime incidents involving ships and oil spills. The research that UP-IMLOS under the Reinvest program looks into the policy and legal framework that concern marine resources, particularly focusing on five resources: fish stock, seaweed, seagrass, mangroves, and coral reef systems in the West Philippine Sea. But while the research focuses on the West Philippine Sea, it may actually be replicated in other marine environments in the Philippines. Next slide. So on overfishing, staple species like tamban, galunggong, and yellowfin tuna in recent history have seen steep declines. So this is not just an environmental issue, but rather an economic issue. In that the average Filipino would be consuming these commodities as part of their everyday life. The Manila Bulletin reports that 87% of municipal waters are now classified as overfished. And the presence of commercial fishing vessels in municipal waters have been a prevailing issue. In fact, there has been a case that has reached the Supreme Court on this matter. So small-scale fisher folks are being outcompeted by commercial fishing vessels. Not to mention, in the West Philippine Sea alone, we have foreign fishing vessels that outcompete our small-scale fisher folks. And this contributes to the worsening of their livelihood in coastal communities. Another matter that we have looked into in our research is the exploitation of giant clams in the West Philippine Sea. Our research in Reinvest looks into human activity in the area, and we looked into activities such as clam harvesting and their adverse effects on coastal communities due to shoreline erosion and dredging. So it's a chain reaction. One of the project teams conducted coastal surveys under Reinvest, and they recorded overall accretion on certain islands in the West Philippine Sea. The research team attributed a rapid increase in the islands area from 2013 to 2014 due to the release of sand during clam dredging activities in the nearby areas. So clam harvesting causes sand to be dredged, and it loosens coral covers. It loosens the sand wherein coral populations are anchored upon, and exposing coral reef systems to reworking by waves and currents, attributing to their erosion and decline. So very scientific. I'm not an expert, I'm not a scientific expert, but it has been an interesting conversation with the project teams on this one. And this is especially concerning because coral reef systems contribute important economic services, example of which would be towards fish population in the area. Next slide. Aside from the exploitation of natural resources, recent maritime incidents within the Philippines have resulted in significant damage to the environment and coastal communities. So, on my screen, on your screen, I'm showing two photos. You might be familiar with both. The first being the grounding of the USS Guardian into Bataha Reef in 2013. The second being the Mindoro oil spill in 2023 due to the sinking of MT Princess Empress. In both for these examples, I would like to highlight the idea of valuation, of providing economic valuation to the damage caused by maritime incidents. So in the first instance, the grounding of the USS Guardian, it did not, the determination of the damages involved, and the later ex gratia payment by the US government, there was no valuation method that was used. So the 87 million ex gratia payment by the US government was not based on any known valuation method. And environmental groups have taken the position that reasonable compensation for damage amounts actually between 16.8 million US dollars and 27 million US dollars. So there is a significant difference between the amount that the Philippine government received for the damage and the projected amount by environmental groups. The second is the Mindoro oil spill. So, in the Mindoro oil spill, an organization, the Center for Energy, Ecology, and Development, estimated the loss to be 41.2 billion. So, it used two valuation approaches. The first being the valuation of lost livelihood of fisher folks, and second, the valuation of non-users' willingness to pay for restoration. So, I'm not an economics expert. But from what I understand, the approach that was used by the CEED here used aimed to capture both use and non-use values. This application actually falls under our understanding of the total economic value framework, requiring two major components in valuation: the use values of resources and services, and the non-use values. However, in both instances, there lacks a uniform valuation approach to determine the losses in livelihood, costs in restoration and cleanup, and the responses of local governments to conservation. This makes it challenging for individuals, communities, and local governments to seek legal remedies or allocate sufficient resources to respond to these threats. Furthermore, environmental damage caused by oil spills have long-term effects, some of which would not be captured by our existing systems and would actually not be covered by our system on damages. Next slide. So, just to provide an overview of the Reinvest program, the Reinvest program aims to develop a framework and methodology towards assessing marine and coastal resources for the establishment of natural capital accounts covering coastal and marine ecosystems in the country. Simply put, what we do in Reinvest is that we account resources and ecosystem services. So that's the first, resource inventory and analysis. Second, we determine their value by establishing domestic and international basis for resource valuation and damage assessment. So that's the second item. And third, that we mainstream the use of ecosystem accounts and valuation approaches by providing policy guidance and advice. One of the research under Reinvest focuses on understanding how accounting and valuation can result in legal measures to protect and preserve marine resources and ecosystem services. So, natural capital accounting as well as valuation we identify has two uses. So it can influence policy, it can inform decision making, but it can also open the door to legal remedies. So the filing of action in courts or before administrative tribunals can be a remedy in case of environmental damage. And having a natural capital accounting system would contribute to those two objectives. So when we began our research, the PENCAS law has yet to be passed. Two project teams, as I mentioned, they focused on certain resources. So on accounting and assessment as well as valuation. So, but one of the examination that we conducted in terms of policy application, of course, began by looking into the Philippine policy framework, particularly on the Philippine Development Plan. So next slide. So the Philippine Development Plan serves as the main policy document driving the government's approach to marine resource valuation, assessment, and accounting. Policy reforms on environmental protection is considered under the PDP as part of the government's role to foster an enabling environment for social and economic transformation. So this involves enhancing the adaptive capacity and resilience of communities and ecosystems to natural hazards and climate change. So it's having a natural capital accounting system it would allow communities, local governments to be more responsive to climate change, would be more responsive to natural hazards. A natural capital account next okay. Okay, that slide. Yep. A natural capital accounting law, which is essentially the PENCAS, plays an essential role in allowing the government to quantify and internalize costs and benefits relating to environment and climate change. The PDP expects that the PENCAS, as the Natural Capital Accounting Act, will serve as a cross-cutting measure to meet this objective. The law, which is intended to be implemented by the PSA and the DENR mainly, should focus on monitoring changes in natural capital stock, pursue accounting of ecosystem damages and losses from natural hazards, and estimate their corresponding monetary value. So we're assigning monetary values to natural capital accounts and integrating the value of ecosystem services into macroeconomic indicators. So previous initiatives on natural capital accounting do not necessarily include ecosystem services and do not include non-use values. So it's the market that drives the value, or at least that drives the value for these services in previous iterations of an NCA initiative. The PENCAS also should establish and maintain a national database and data management system for natural resources. So having this database would allow local governments to respond and apply this to their own local contexts as they may need. Next slide. So I mentioned that the PENCAS is considered as a cross-cutting measure. So as one of the cross-cutting measures under the PDP, it should contribute to enhance the capacity of local governments and national governments to adapt and to increase the resilience of communities and ecosystems to natural hazards and climate change. So it does so by, first, informing national and subnational policy to respond to threats brought about by climate change and disasters. This would involve investing in disaster preparedness and prevention through resilient infrastructure. So the thing with this observation, actually from our research, we have learned that certain ecosystem services and certain resources have various functions. What I see here is that it is necessary to preserve ecosystem services that function towards against climate change and mitigation of disaster risk. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to create infrastructure. it may mean that we have to preserve and conserve certain resources to mitigate disaster. So, as I mentioned under Invest, we examined the role of mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs as natural deterrent to natural hazards, such as storm surges, flooding, and wave action, and the possible costs, alternatively, of constructing man-made structures when these resources are lost. So, the thing with mangroves, for example, they can dissipate wave energy, which I learned from MSI, of course. So they have that function of dissipating wave energy that can respond to natural calamity and protect coastal communities. A possible alternative for mangroves would be building a seawall, which would protect coastal communities. However, a seawall would not share the function of serving as breeding grounds for fish population. And that multiplicity of function of certain resources would need to be captured by natural capital accounts. And since the alternative being building infrastructure might be more expensive than than preserving existing natural resources and services. Okay. So furthermore, the policy seeking to respond to natural hazards and climate change should be based on data taken from the natural capital accounting law. It is important, however, that the data is localized. So one of the discussions that we've had under Reinvest is that while you have a natural capital accounting app that would be at what would gather that would have macroeconomic indicators, it should be translated to a local level that would empower local governments and communities to use the data to respond to their own needs. It is important that the data gathered under PENCAS should be localized to allow LGUs to adapt fit-for-purpose solutions within their own context. Coastal LGUs, for instance, would need to respond to hazards brought by climate change and natural disasters. They may likewise be confronted by increased risks arising from human causes, such as oil spills, which affect livelihood in coastal communities. And that they would be able to possibly pass ordinances or measures that can help them develop their local economies. The system, the NCA, of course, assigns monetary value to natural capital and ecosystem services. This allows a uniform and holistic appreciation of risks, economic costs, and benefits in these investments. So when we talk about, of course, the marine environment and investments relating to the marine environment, we are also talking about adopting or having an understanding of the blue economy framework. The framework emphasizes the protection and preservation of marine resources and the sustainable use of these resources while minimizing negative externalities, the effects of pollution, and the use of these resources, all the while preserving and allowing for economic growth. So it's highlighting the role of natural resources in that we do not just take away these resources, but rather sustainably using them to grow our own economy. Right. Next slide. So the second policy instrument that we looked at is the roadmap to institutionalize natural capital accounting. This was developed by the Department of Economy, Planning and Development back when it was NEDA, with the PSA, the Philippine Statistics Authority, and the DNR in March 2022. So the roadmap emphasizes linking natural capital accounts to decision making. This would require demonstrating how economic activity interacts with the environment. So we've illustrated that earlier with the blue economy framework on how resources would contribute towards possibly sustained investments. Doing so would lead to government agencies and local governments to make better and sustainable economic decisions in the long run. So under the roadmap, the NCA is a tool that measures changes in the stock of natural capital. So that implies that there should be a baseline and it should be measured over time. And that it integrates the value of ecosystem services into accounting and reporting systems. Right. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier that there were early initiatives on natural capital accounting. So the two initiatives that we looked into and which we find certain parallels with the PENCAS would be the NRAP, or the Environmental and Natural Resources Accounting Project by the DENR, which is at the agency level only, and the PINRA. So the PINRA being the Philippine Economic, Environmental, and Natural Resource Accounting System. That one, unlike the NRAP, was promulgated and supported through an executive order in 1997. So the NRAP sought to address gaps in the system of national accounts by integrating environmental and economic considerations into national accounting. It developed a framework emphasizing the use of accounting to support policy. So it's centered on the use of data towards policy development, or how economic accounts serve as tools that drive and influence governmental action that intend to alter the amount, composition, and distribution of outputs. It aimed to have a complete accounting of all economic inputs and outputs by expanding the scope of accounting to cover not just marketed capital, but also to include input and output of services of non-marketed capital. This addresses the gap in conventional accounting, where economic values are only assigned to capital used in marketed goods. So it's market-driven. The value is market-driven rather than and effectively leaving out non-marketed goods or services which are not necessarily in the market. So the PINRA, the NRAP led to the creation of the PINRA system. So the PINRA, as I mentioned earlier, was institutionalized through Executive Order number 406, series of 1997, to address the gaps in the coverage of our Philippine system of national accounts by generating macro indicators that reflect the relationship and interaction between the natural environment and the economy. So just for everyone's information, an executive order is an act of the president providing for rules of general or permanent character. It is limited by existing laws and the Constitution, and it serves to manage and direct the enforcement of these laws or based on a constitutional mandate. For EO 406, an examination of its clauses show that it would be based on the functions of the then NSCB, the DNR, and NEDA. So the PINRA, unlike the NRAP, focused on data production and the development of environmental accounts. As the PINRA functions as a satellite account for our Philippine system of national accounts, it adopted the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, the UNSEEA framework, which also served as the basis of the PSNA. This effectively meant that valuation methods under the PINRA used market transaction-based information, which excluded certain valuation methods. So it's different from NRAP in that regard, in that it focused on data gathering as well as market transaction-based information. While the PINRA system and the NRAP differed in scope, institutionalization, and methodological approaches, both initiatives played crucial roles in integrating NCA into the Philippines economic framework. So after that overview of previous initiatives, we then proceed to the PENCAS. Next slide. So this quote by Senator Lauren Legarda So let me read it. Unfortunately, what we do not know, we have failed to value, and we have failed to account for it, resulting in our lack of understanding of what we are gaining or losing. So Senator Legarda said this during her sponsorship speech for the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System Act, or the PENCAS. This was back in September 2023, when it was still a bill in Congress. I chose this quote from her speech since I thought that this encapsulates the rationale behind the PENCAS. So there being a need to account for and assign values to resources and ecosystem services, regardless of their value for humans. So regardless of their anthropogenic use. This is often a blind spot since we value, if you noticed earlier, we place value based on markets. We based on the value that humans assign to natural resources. But as we understand in Reinvest, the value of these resources, there is value in these resources, which aren't necessarily anchored to value derived from human consumption or from market forces. Next slide. So the PENCAS presents an opportunity for more data-driven policymaking and may possibly have applications in seeking for compensation arising from environmental damage or harm. So this is what I mentioned earlier, that the PENCAS has the potential of actually setting value on resources that can possibly be enforced in courts. So I will try to illustrate this later. So it does so by enabling the following. So this should, as I mentioned, this is an enabling, it contributes to an enabling environment. In that strategic planning, it enables strategic planning at various government levels, so national and subnational, to align economic growth with sustainability principles. The allocation of budget based on evidence, prioritizing conservation and restoration efforts in areas most vulnerable to degradation. So by accounting for, let's say, fish population, and having those indicators, the government may be able to determine where funding or budget should be allocated to protect these species or endangered resources. Regular monitoring mechanisms to track changes in environmental assets and optimize resource management. And finally, enhanced interagency coordination among national agencies. And this would foster information sharing and efficient data management to improve governance of natural resources. So we mentioned earlier, we have been mentioning that the data is both at a national and subnational level. So there must be coordination between these national agencies as well as local governments. Next slide. So we understand that the implementing rules and regulations to operationalize the PENCAS actually underwent its ceremonial signing last May. So while we await for the publication of the IRR, we looked into the provisions of the PENCAS and explore how it can achieve its objectives. So objectives being what is displayed on our screen right now. So with respect to natural capital accounting and valuation, so similar to previous initiatives to institutionalize natural capital accounting, the PENCAS Act will establish natural capital accounts and will utilize them to drive policies which consider environmental assets and related expenditures. The PENCAS, however, pushes this further under Section 5E by institutionalizing the valuation of natural capital, which includes ecosystem services. So it mandates the assignment of value for these resources. So the PENCAS, like the PINRA, follows the SCEA framework, which integrates economic and environmental data to provide a comprehensive view of interrelationship between the economy, the environment, and the stocks and flows of natural assets. So we expect that the PENCAS would include data and statistics important for policymaking, particularly the depletion, degradation, and restoration of natural capital, environmental protection expenditures, how much the government spends on environmental protection and conservation, pollution and quality of land, air, and water, environmental damage, and the savings that may be derived from preserving natural capital. This would contribute towards planning and policymaking at both national and subnational level. So the PENCAS enhances evidence-based planning. So we use the data gathered from the PENCAS towards planning by local governments and national government by generating standardized data on the condition and value of ecosystems. So it's not just present conditions, but it should account for past conditions, setting a baseline, and future conditions, and the changing value of these ecosystems over time. It supports the formulation of development plans that are both economically sound and ecologically responsible. More importantly, the availability of disaggregated data also enables local government units to tailor policies to their specific ecological context. Localizing data allows LGUs to design policies that are context sensitive and aligned with their unique environmental assets and vulnerabilities. This is important, for example, in the West Philippine Sea, wherein the nearest municipality is the municipality of Kalayaan, and that they would need to address issues in the West Philippine Sea in their decision-making processes. This is also particularly relevant for local economies on fisheries and tourism, where the resources that are used, as well as the maintenance of their ecosystem services, has direct impact on their livelihoods. So while progressively maintaining natural capital accounts would greatly inform policy, the accounting and valuation of natural capital may also have applications in terms of seeking redress or compensation for damage caused to the environment. And so we go into the second aspect of and possible application of the PENCAS. Next slide. So this is the PENCAS as a tool to determine extent of liability in our existing legal regimes. A review of existing laws revealed that a gap in environmental protection, specifically on laws that can hold individuals or groups liable for damage or harm to the environment. The concepts of environmental harm and environmental damage notably do not have uniform definition under our law. So that's one of the challenges that we had to encounter. So we had to look for a definition, whether domestically or internationally, on environmental harm and environmental damage. Notably, there is one Supreme Court decision that defined environmental harm, but only as to its scope. So this is the case of Sagakala versus National Power Corporation, wherein the court defined the scope of environmental harm to include immediate and future physical injury to people, emotional distress from fear of future injury, social and economic disruption, remediation costs, property damage, ecological damage, and regulatory harm. The Sagangkala case is one of the few cases that mention environmental harm. The case applied tort law or the law on damages to award damage to private individuals who suffered loss due to the flooding in Lake Lanao. Notably, however, the damages awarded were based on the National Power Corporation's negligence in performing its duty to maintain the Agus Regulation Dam, which resulted in the overflooding. So it's not necessarily environmental harm as defined under international law or contemplated in other jurisdictions. So we have that difficulty when we talk about seeking for compensation due to environmental damage. So we have an issue on the definition. Okay. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, previous slide. Not yet. That's not. Okay, so it's the first one. So no legal definition. The second is the regime of compensation for environmental damage is not considered as a separate category of damages as contemplated under Philippine law. So if we look at, well, we did a survey of environmental laws. And if we look at the provisions on liability or the penalties that are imposed under these laws, there's no reference to environmental damage compensation per se, and they only fall under either civil damages, criminal liability in the form of imprisonment or fine, or administrative fine. So when awarded by the courts, the fines and liabilities go into a special fund that agencies may use for the restoration, rehabilitation, or conservation of resources. So while the laws do not expressly state that this is environmental damage compensation, in a way, it has implied that this must go into restoration, rehabilitation, or conservation cost. And this is where accounting and valuation of resources play an important role. Because when we examine the provisions of the laws, they do not set a standard for the amount of the fine or the liability of erring individuals or groups. Okay. Next slide, please. So these are some of the laws that have provisions and that impose fines when it comes to environmental damage. So you have the Philippine Fisheries Code, the National Integrated Protected Area System, Wildlife Conservation and Protection Act, the Tubata Reef National Park Act, and the Philippine Clean Water Act. Later, I will illustrate the Philippine Fisheries Code provisions of that, the Tubata Reef National Park, and the NIPAS Act. Next slide, please. So how will we apply the PENCAS? So this is very theoretical, just to set expectations. It's very theoretical. This has not yet been tested, considering that the PENCAS is a new law as well. So if you look at the declaration of policy under the PENCAS, it is the policy of the state to protect and promote ecological balance and resilience and advance the right of people to live in harmony with nature. So that's the first one. The second, it is for us to understand the nature's pricelessness, its heritage and intrinsic value, and the interdependencies in the implementation of policies, to consider that nature and ecosystems have the inherent right to exist. With an end view, emphasizing this, with an end view of recognizing legal rights that serve to protect endangered ecosystems and applying the precautionary principle, especially when economic values cannot be estimated. So the PENCAS does not have any provision. Just to be clear, it does not have any provision that would involve the enforcement or protection of natural resources. So it doesn't have any penal clauses. It doesn't impose any penalties. However, from the declaration of policy, it recognizes that there is an obligation to protect and promote ecological balance. And in understanding the value of nature, we are able to recognize legal rights that serve to protect endangered ecosystems. Next slide, please. So how do we apply PENCAS, if ever? So the natural capital accounting system and valuation of resources under the PENCAS can serve as an important tool by doing the following. The PENCAS can establish baselines before damage occurs. Accurate accounting and valuation of resources and ecosystems before harm or injury occurs help quantify losses and determine actual damages. So the complication when we file a case in court, for example, for damages, is that we have to prove actual damages. And if we do not have that kind of evidence needed, then most likely that claim would be denied or dismissed by the courts. This is critical in legal or administrative proceedings to determine the compensation or the penalties imposed by law. That's the first. The second is that the PENCAS can aid in quantifying damage based on clear and uniform standards. So what we have seen is that the PENCAS actually adopts a certain system of accounting. Now we are left to determine a system of valuation. Since the PENCAS tracks changes in ecosystem health and resource availability, these metrics can be used to calculate the cost of environmental harm, including those services like clean air or water. More importantly, the PENCAS uses internationally and domestically recognized standards, which may be more acceptable before tribunals or courts. That's the second one. The third is that by recognizing the intrinsic and economic value of nature, the PENCAS provides evidence for enforcing environmental laws. It strengthens the case for restoration, the obligation to restore, or to provide for financial reparations. So since you already have the value of lost resources or the cost of building structures to replace lost resources or ecosystem services, then there is basis to award a certain amount. Finally, the PENCAS would promote accountability. Responsible agencies are mandated to publish PENCAS data, making it accessible to the public at large. Section 11 of the PENCAS also allows participatory mechanisms and citizen remedies, which ensure accountability and transparency when these accounts are used by agencies. So, next slide. I think we're nearing the end. So as I mentioned earlier, these three laws have certain provisions that may require the use of certain standards to determine compensation. So the first is the Philippine Fisheries Code as amended. So under the Philippine Fisheries Code, a person who exploits or exports corals shall pay compensation for the restoration of the damaged coral reefs. The amount will be based on available studies, so the basis is based on scientific studies, and determined by the Department of Agriculture. That's under Section 96 of the law. So the PENCAS may be applied in this case. It may be used by the Department of Agriculture to determine the restoration amount for these damaged coral reefs. Any study also conducted by experts, by scientific experts, may be applied based on the provisions of this law. So those studies may be able to use publicly available data under the PENCAS. The second is the Tubataha Reefs Natural Park Act. The TRNP Act states that persons or entities responsible for damages to the reef shall be subject to the payment of administrative fines. There's an administrative fine, administrative liability, and the fine is set by the Tubataha Protected Area Management Board. The setting of this fine is based on current valuation standards and to the payment of the cost of restoration. So this provision under the TRNP Act may find the PENCAS data very useful in determining valuation standards in case of damage to the Tubataha protected areas. And finally, Section 21 of the NIPAS Act provides that an act violating its provisions, the NIPAS Act, resulting in damage to a protected area, and requires rehabilitation or restoration as determined by the court. The offender shall be required to restore or compensate for the restoration to the damage. So Section 21 references a judicial proceeding wherein a damage to a protected area may be subject, the offender of which may be subject to restoration costs. And having the PENCAS provide for the account of natural resources in that protected area, as well as the value of these resources, would then allow the court to determine the proper award for damages or the proper award for compensation. So in conclusion, the integration of natural capital accounting through the PENCAS is a transformative step in environmental governance. By assigning measurable value to ecosystems and their services, the PENCAS empowers policymakers, communities, and legal institutions to recognize the true cost of environmental damage and harm. This framework not only enhances transparency and accountability, but also provides for a foundation for determining liability when ecological harm occurs. It shifts the narrative from viewing nature as one where we can get inexhaustible resources to acknowledging that there is indeed limitation, and it being a vital economic asset for our growth as a nation. So it demands that we protect, restore, and undertake responsible stewardship of these resources. As environmental challenges occur in the future, the role of PENCAS becomes increasingly important. It enables the Philippines to align with global sustainability standards while tailoring solutions to local ecological realities. More importantly, it equips stakeholders with the data and tools needed to pursue justice for environmental damage, ensuring that those responsible are held accountable and that affected ecosystems and communities receive due compensation and support. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for this opportunity to share our research. And I would like to turn you over to the organizers of this event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney Raywell, for that comprehensive and highly informative presentation. And what struck me the most is that there is a need to account or assign values for natural resources regardless of their value for human. Once again, thank you so much, Attorney Raywell. To our attendees who have questions, you can utilize the Q&A function of Zoom, or you could simply type it in the chat box, and we will address it during our open forum. So for our next speaker is Attorney Fritzline Q. Palmieri from Tanggol, Kalikasan, who will be discussing multi-sectoral approaches to conservation and environmental justice. Attorney Fritz will share insights from the Restore WPS project and other initiatives, highlighting grassroots level conservation efforts and lessons learned. To know more about Attorney Fritz, let me read her bio note. Attorney Fritzline Palmieri is an assistant professor in the Department of Social Forestry and Social Governance CFNR, where she teaches social forestry, social conservation, and forestry policy and institutions. Attorney Palmieri is also the executive director of Tanggol Kalikasan Incorporated, a non-stock, non-profit public interest environmental law office that aims to facilitate the empowerment of communities and institutions to manage their ecosystem through law and other creative mechanisms. Lastly, Attorney Fritz is one of the project specialists of the Reinvest WPS Project 2, providing expert legal guidance on environmental laws and regulations throughout the course of the project. An educator, a dedicated environmental advocate, and a proud mother of two, let us all welcome Attorney Fritzline Q. Palmieri.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction to the UPLB-INREM team. Again, thank you so much for inviting me in today's webinar. Okay, so today I'll be presenting our project, as mentioned by Jamela, the multi-sectoral approaches towards conservation and environmental justice, which was realized through the Restore WPS project. So allow me to share our not only the project but also a story of collaboration, of innovation and commitment for the WPS. So this topic will focus on how different sectors, government, civil society, communities, and also partners, together with the academe, came together to advance conservation and environmental justice. And I know that this is just a start of a bigger responsibility. So through this presentation, I will walk you through our journey, the challenges we faced, the milestones we achieved, and also the lessons that we learned along the way as an organization. So, sorry. Ako nga pala may control. Okay. Yeah, so for the outline of my presentation, I'll be sharing a brief background of the project, the approaches that we have followed, the milestones and achievements, the project impact, and also the lessons learned and ways forward for this project. Okay, so again, as a background, the topic will cover the Restore WPS. Restore stands for Restoring the Resources for Economic Sustainability of WPS. So I will not delve much on the importance of the WPS as this will be presented later through the ADP. So Restore WPS was supported by the USAID through the Jerry Rojas Foundation from November 2023 up to the first quarter of 2025. So this was implemented by Tanggol Kalikasan or Defense in Nature, which is a non-stock, non-profit organization involved in public interest lawyering in the Philippines for around 38 years. So formerly, TK is the legal arm of Haribon Foundation until it registered as its own in 2001. So, as a public interest environmental law office, Tanggol Kalikasan envisions an empowered society that relates with its environment in just and sustainable manner for the equitable benefit of all Filipinos. And one of the programs that we conducted in order to realize this objective is through the Restore WPS. So, the Restore WPS was implemented in partnership with the UP-MSI, Western Philippine University, and also the World Wildlife Fund, Philippines. Okay. So, the goal of our project was to provide sustainable fishing resources and livelihood for the communities in the WPS, thereby creating an impact in addressing food security. So basically, the project is designed to raise awareness and deliver sound science that supports informed decision making to address threats to our fishery resources in the West Philippine Sea. So through stronger multi-sectoral approaches, the project sought to develop a national policy and also a research agenda that fosters collaboration in protecting the WPS while at the same time ensuring the sustainability of coastal communities' livelihoods. So the objectives of the project included the reduction of pressure on the fisheries due to IUUF and poaching and also reduce fishing effort in critical habitats. So the project was implemented through the following strategic approaches. So we have constituency building, capacity building, science-based research and development, and livelihood diversification and enterprise support. So for constituency building and capacity building and strengthening, these approaches were delivered by Tanggol Kalikasan, while the science-based research and development was implemented by the UPMSI, and the livelihood diversification and enterprise support was through the WWF. Okay, so let me present each of these approaches in the next slides. So our first strategic approach is solidifying partnerships, mobilize stakeholders in policy development and advocacy. So in this approach, we began with identification of state and non-state actors. We coordinated and established partnership together with the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. And this activity was crucial in organizing key partners who would be part of our platform or of our project. And we also believe that by bringing everyone together early on, we ensured that the project had a strong and inclusive foundation. So another approach was through the multi-agency and multi-sectoral summit. So we also conducted national summit using hybrid platform, and the summit was able to set the tone of our project and also the direction where our project or what our project will do for the next years. So beyond being just a venue for introduction of our project, the summit also served as an opportunity to discuss mechanisms for collaboration opportunities for capacity building, ways to improve science-based decision-making, as well as strategies to enhance livelihood policy framework. So we also provided support in developing policy agenda and advocacy, such as template ordinance, policy briefs, and other advocacy materials. We also believe that by equipping our local partners with these tools, we aim to strengthen governance frameworks and also ensure that conservation and sustainable use are embedded in our local policies. So, to deepen understanding on the issues in the West Philippine Sea, the network or the partners that we were able to convene include the media, CSOs, and also representatives from various national and local government agencies. For the strategic approach number 2, so we conducted capacity building and strengthening of both state and non-state actors. So we started with the conduct of the training needs assessment to identify gaps and priorities. And based on the results of this training needs assessment, we developed modules on natural resources management and also environmental law enforcement module, which was participated by 11 government agencies. So mostly our participants were from the provinces facing the West Philippine Sea. So the modules were also tested or pilot tested in the trainings conducted or participated by 23 local government units department heads, which include the MENRO, the Municipal Agriculturist Office, and also some of the key personnel of the local government units. And these modules were also submitted to the concerned government agencies for their adoption and also implementation to help them institutionalize knowledge and practices within within the system. Okay. For the strategic approach number 3, this has something to do with the science-based research and development as decision support system. So the project through the UPMSI was focused on strengthening science-based research and development as a decision support system. So it started in the development of a research agenda, which was also presented to concerned government agencies for funding and also for implementation through the respective action plans. So to ensure wider access of this information on conservation climate science, we also have the WPS Hub that I will also be present to you later, which contains the briefs or other information relating to WPS. Okay, next is the livelihood aspect or the livelihood component of the project. So this SA4 or strategic approach number 4 is focused on the livelihood diversification and enterprise support, wherein we began with the conduct of assessment and gap analysis to evaluate the existing livelihood interventions and related policies. And this was followed by a survey of and documentation of the lessons learned from previous livelihood projects, which was participated by the fisher folks and people's organizations along the coastal communities in the West Philippine Sea. So through this survey and assessment and gap analysis, we were able to provide recommendations for policy enhancements on livelihood support. Unfortunately, because the project was terminated earlier than its original schedule, we were not able to deliver the component or the item 4 and 5. That's why it is in red font. Okay, so guided by those strategic approaches, so allow me to share also with you the key milestones and achievements in advancing multi-sectoral approaches to conservation and environmental justice. So okay, so as mentioned earlier, so we have this first national summit on the West Philippine Sea last August 2023. So we believe that with the top to bottom approach, we can achieve our objective towards the protection and conservation of the WPS. So this was in August 2023, where we convened the WPS's the West Philippine Sea's National Summit in Pasay City, wherein we brought together local government leaders, top executive officials from the DILG through Assistant Secretary De Leon, BIFAR. We also have from UPMSI and other government agencies. Yan, baka may nakikilala kayo in the picture. So this brought together various stakeholders to build a unified national response for the protection and sustainable use of the West Philippine Sea. So the summit, again led by the Anggol Kalikasan with support from the DA, BIFAR, and also by the DILG, carried the theme Local and National Response, Life and Livelihood. So it emphasized that the WPS is not only rich in biodiversity but also vital to food security, livelihoods in our national jurisdiction. So most importantly, the summit also resulted in shared vision, a protected and sustainably managed WPS for the benefit of the present and future generation. So as can be seen in the picture, there were approximately 300 participants who participated on site and 200 online. And the participants, again, included representatives from the national government agencies, local government agencies, fisher folks organizations, federations, women's organizations, developmental organizations, as well as media practitioners. So, kumbaga po ay nilahat na namin, lahat ng pwedeng ma-invite to set the tone of the objective of our project. So, the members of the academe from the state universities and colleges located in the coastal provinces of the WPS were also present as our partners through our Institute of Environmental Governance, which is a flagship program of Tanggol Kalikasan. So the academic institutions extended valuable support and assistance in providing the context and also the recommendations on local governance, environmental protection, and capacity building at the community level. So the summit, it led to the identification of a common vision and national plan of action that will be translated into provincial action plans by the respective local government units. Yan. So this was the result of the summit. So let me share to you briefly the national action plans for the West Philippine Sea. As I believe that this all of us should know about these plans because you might also have projects or proposals that you may consider these plans or these activities in your proposal. So as a multi-sectoral approach, so these agencies consist the WPS conveners group. So lahat yan from the national to local officers were included in the WPS conveners group who prepared the national WPS action plans. So we divided the conveners into different teams such as the science and academe, tourism, policy, law enforcement, environment, conservation, livelihood, and aquaculture. Okay, so next I will be sharing with you the different plans of action per team. So these plans represent the output of each group during the breakout sessions that we had during the summit. So for the science and academe, their goal is to have a continuous innovation and adoption of science-based decision-making for a sustainable blue economy in the West Philippine Sea. Okay, for the tourism, they aim to promote and develop sustainable community-managed ecotourism in the West Philippine Sea as a global destination for green tourism. And then for the policy, so their goal is to ensure and secure free, equitable, and sustainable access to the resources, rule of law, national and international collaboration, food and energy security, national sovereignty, territorial integrity, sovereign rights, cultural heritage, and law enforcement. And then for law enforcement, basically their goal is to prevent and deter internal and external violations and threats in the WPS. And for environment conservation, composed of the DNR, BFAR, PCSD, and Coast Guard, the goal is to promote science-based approaches, use of advanced technologies, scientific researches, and implementation of conservation and biodiversity management programs. And then for livelihood, so basically their objective or their goal is to have to ensure food security through ecologically sound fishing and aquaculture practices, sustainably manage and good governance of fisheries management areas, and also to provide gender responsive sustainable livelihood with preservation conservation of fisheries management areas within the WPS. So I hope you will reflect on these areas and know where your expertise, resources, or networks might help our government in achieving these plans of actions for the WPS. Ayan, ayaw na mag-next. Okay. So, as mentioned, these national plans of actions were not does not remain in the national level, but these were also translated to provincial action plans through the provincial caravans. So ideally, we targeted 10 provincial caravans across the provinces in the West Philippine Sea, but we were able to finish only 7 caravans. So these caravans were conducted in these provinces. So I'll be showing to you the pictures, the date when these caravans were conducted, the attendees, and a study tour in some of the places in the respective provinces. So the objective of this provincial WPS action plan is to, again, to translate the national plans into coordinated action plans and concrete policies. So the caravans also serve as a way of localizing and operationalizing the outputs of the WPS National Summit. And the goal was to engage the provincial and municipal leaders, refine and institutionalize their action plans, and also ensure that even stakeholders who were not able to participate in the summit had the chance to validate and contribute to enhance the respective strategies. So this process was made to make our activity truly inclusive and also responsive to evolving priorities. So the caravans were conducted from 2023 to 2025 in Palawan, Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, yan, La Union, Zambales, Pangasinan, and Occidental Mindoro. Yan. And this was the last caravan last January 21, 2025 in Occidental Mindoro. And as part of the caravan, okay. So to add also, there were around 1,400 individuals from various sectors who took part in our 7 caravans. And this strong turnout of the participants reflects not only widespread interest, but also the commitment of different sectors from each of the provinces that we visited to address pressing issues on environment and agriculture and community resilience in the West Philippine Sea. So we also commend those provinces that we visited because the local chief executives from the governor, vice governor, the Menro, Mao, and other officers, the MPDO, were present during those provincial caravans to participate and listen to the National Plan of Actions shared by the DILG. Okay, so aside from these caravans, the team were also fortunate enough to visit some of the important sites in several areas. Like in Palawan, they visited the Binduyan Marine Research Station, the Mangrove Research Restoration Projects in Pangasinan, in Lingayen, the Buwed Mangrove Eco Park in Alaminos, and the Bifar Aquaculture in Ilocos Sur. Okay, so what's the result of this action plan? So the action plans cover a wide range of strategies that also strengthens both governance and community resilience. So the plans are organized into activities, the responsible office or officers, and the partner agency, as well as a timeline. So you may check the details of these respective action plans of your respective provinces in our website. So these caravans ensured that commitments and action points were directly aligned with the mandates and capacities of the local government units, fostering ownership, and also accountability at the national level. Okay? And another important event in each caravan was the sealing of commitment, which symbolizes the collective pledge of the participants during the caravan. So the stakeholders, they signed on the commitment wall, which while we can say that this is very simple, yet this is a powerful act as it represents a shared responsibility among local leaders, government agencies, CSOs, and communities to implement the action plans in their respective provinces. Okay, so as for the project impact, the project was able to build an unprecedented collaboration, fostering strong partnerships between national agencies and local stakeholders. And this partnership strengthened the bridge between policy and also on the ground action. Another one is the updated action plans, wherein these action plans were secured and endorsed to the local chief executives. And third, we were able to achieve strengthened local engagement wherein the communities became more aware, they were participative, and developed a deeper public understanding of ocean-related issues, proving that lasting change begins with a collective awareness and action. Okay, so as for the lessons learned, we believe that collaboration was a key to the success of these activities. So while TK led coordination, logistics, and stakeholder engagement, we cannot do this alone because of the significance of having the consortium with UPMSI, WPS, and also the WWF, as well as the strong support from the Department of Interior and Local Government, which provided and coordinated everything just for us to conduct the provincial caravans. So we were able to produce also communication materials, which I will be showing to you later, to raise awareness on WPS. And again, the participation of the top level executives from these local government units were also very commendable. Okay, so for the ways forward, since I cannot say that this is a conclusion, but more on ways forward, since this is just a beginning of something bigger, of more activities that we are planning for WPS. So from planning to implementation, Restore WPS is now shifting to a sustained action. So we are planning to establish provincial WPS councils through an ordinance. And we are also setting up tracking and evaluation systems to monitor the LGU commitments and integration of their West Philippine Sea action plans into their local policies. Okay, and lastly, as one of the outputs of the project, we have this WPS hub. You can type on your Google wpshub.ph, wherein this platform was created in order to promote in accordance with the PENCAS, as mentioned by the earlier speaker, to promote interagency coordination, data sharing among various stakeholders. So if you have any data relevant to West Philippine Sea that you may want to publish, please let us know so we can include your information in WPS Hub. So basically, this platform is for the purpose of information sharing and also all activities that can be used by the public, especially in the current and relevant issues in the West Philippine Sea. Okay, so I think yeah, ito lang yung ibang part ng aming hub, where you can see the conveners of this hub, and this site is being maintained up to now by Tanggol Kalikasan. And yeah, some of the plans which I failed to mention earlier again can be checked in our website. So I think that's all for my presentation. And I think I still have time. Can we play the ABP for the WPS? Thank you.
Ang Pilipinas, isang bansang tropikal, arkipelago at napapaligiran ng mayamang katubigan na sagana sa likas yaman. Hindi katakataka na maraming napagkukunan ng hanap buhay ang mga Pilipino rito. Isa ang kanlurang dagat ng Pilipinas o West Philippine Sea sa mga katubigang may malaking ambag at suporta sa kabuhayan ng mga Pilipino. Partikular sa mga mangingisda mula sa mga isla at lalawigan ng Batanes, Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, La Union, Pangasinan, Zambales, Cavite, Batangas, Mindoro at Palawan. Ang West Philippine Sea ay ang opisyal na designasyong iginawad ng Pilipinas patungkol sa mga bahagi ng South China Sea na pumapaloob sa Exclusive Economic Zone o EEZ ng bansa. Ito ay binubuo ng ating katubigan sa kanlurang bahagi ng Pilipinas mula sa Batanes, pababa ng Luzon hanggang Palawan. Dito kumukuha ng ikabubuhay ang maraming mangingisda sa bansa. Sa katunayan, sa datos ng Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources o BFAR, noong taong 2023, hindi bababa sa 275,520 metric tons ang mga nahuling isda mula sa Regions 1, 2, 3, 4 at Mimaropa Region na bumubuo ng West Philippine Sea. Mayaman din sa corals ang West Philippine Sea na nagpapanatili sa produksyon ng marine life o mga isda rito. Ang Kalayaan Island Group ay koleksyon ng iba't ibang features tulad ng mga isla, atolls, reefs at shoals kung saan ang mga coral at isda ay nangingitlog at nagpaparami. Ang mga itlog at larva na ito ay dinadala ng agos sa mga bansa sa paligid ng South China Sea tulad ng Pilipinas. Bukod sa malaking kontribusyon ng West Philippine Sea sa mga isdang nahuhuli rito, sagana rin ito sa methane hydrates, isang substance na nabubuo sa ilalim ng dagat kung saan sobrang lamig ng temperatura at mataas ang pressure gawa ng lalim ng tubig. May malaking reserba rin ng langis at natural gas sa bahaging ito ng bansa. Ayon sa datos mula sa Philippine Department of Energy, ang WPS ay may potensyal para sa mahigit 57.8 trillion cubic feet ng natural gas at 6.1 billion barrels of oil na maaaring may poproduce ng South China Sea. Kaya naman hindi rin may kakailang ang West Philippine Sea ay may ganitong mga yaman na maaaring makatulong sa ekonomiya ng bansa. Maraming Pilipino ang umaasa at nakasalalay ang ikinabubuhay rito. Datapwat, hindi maitatanggi na may mga pagkakataong na isasantabi ang kapakanan ng West Philippine Sea at napapabayaan ito. May ilan na sobra-sobra na ang hinuhuling mga isda at kahit maliliit pa ay hindi rin pinapalagpas. Gayon din ang mga illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing o IUUF na nagiging dahilan sa mababa at mabagal na produksyon o pagdami ng mga isda sa iba't ibang lugar. May mga pagkakataong ding hindi maayos ang pagkakakuha o pagkonsumo sa mga likas yaman dito na nagiging dahilan ng pagkasira at pagkawasak ng coral reef na siyang tahanan ng mga isda at yamang dagat. Ilan pa nga sa mga bantang kinakaharap dito ay ang matinding kondisyon ng panahon at ang binabantayang polusyon sa katubigang ito. Ito ang mga bantang tuluyang sisira sa kalikasan ng West Philippine Sea kung hindi agad mababantayan at masosolusyonan. Sa dami at laki ng likas yaman sa West Philippine Sea, may mga bansa ring nakikiangkin ito tulad ng Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, Brunei at China. Ngunit sa mga nakalipas na taon, ang China ang pinakaaktibong umaangkin sa teritoryo at katubigang ito. Sa paniniwala ng China, Bahagi ng kanilang bansa ang West Philippine Sea sa ilalim ng 9-dash line na unang lumabas noong 1947. Ang 9-dash line na ito ay walang katiyakan na demarkasyon o linya na tumutukoy sa sakop ng bansang China. Ayon sa Arbitral Award o sa naging desisyon ng Arbitral Tribunal at nailathala sa Time Magazine, ang mapang ito na ginagamit ng bansang China ay walang legal na batayan upang umangkin sa mga katubigan tulad ng West Philippine Sea. Bilang basehan naman ng Pilipinas sa pag-angkin ng West Philippine Sea ay ang United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea o UNCLOS. Ito ay nagsasaad at nagpapataw ng isang international standard para sa hangganan ng mga katubigan at karagatan ng lahat ng bansa sa mundo. Maraming ancient maps ang ginamit ng Pilipinas bilang patunay na ang mga isla sa WPS ay pasok sa teritoryo nito. Isa na rito ang mapa na ginawa noong 1734 ng isang Jesuit priest na si Pedro Morillo Velarde. Ang mapang ito ang unang nagpangalan sa Scarborough Shoal at tinawag na panakot na ang ibig sabihin ay danger at kalaunan ay tinawag na Scarborough Shoal nang palitan ito ng mga European cartographer. Gayon din ang Los Bajos de Paragua o Shoal of Palawan na tumutukoy sa Spratly Islands. Isa pang kahalagahan ng mapang ito ay ang cartouche o selyo ng Hari ng Espanya bilang opisyal na pagkilala sa mapang ito ng Pilipinas. Sa kabila nito, hindi tinatanggap ng China ang proklamasyong ito ng UNCLOS at ng International Arbitral Tribunal noong 2016. At upang mapanatili ang kanilang lakas sa pag-aangkin sa West Philippine Sea, noong 2014, gumawa sila ng 7 artipisyal na mga isla sa loob ng Philippine Economic Zone na magsisilbing base na kanilang bansa. Mula noon hanggang sa kasalukuyan ay patuloy ang pangbubuli at panghaharas ng mga Chinese Coast Guard sa ating mga kababayan sa West Philippine Sea. Patunay dito ay ang iba't ibang insidente na nalalathala sa mga dyaryo at telebisyon. Sa ginagawang ito ng bansang China, maraming mga Pilipino na ang walang layang makapangisda sa West Philippine Sea mula nang okupahan ito ng China noong 2012. Sa katunayan, may mga mangingisda sa Zambales ang dati ay kumikita pa ng 4,000 piso kada laot. Ngunit ngayon ay wala nang nahuhuling mga isda dahil sa pagpasok ng mga Chinese militia vessel sa West Philippine Sea. Nakababahala ang bawat araw na papalapit na ng papalapit sa teritoryo at mga baybayin ng Pilipinas ang mga Chinese militia vessels na ito. Malaki na ang nawawala sa kabuhayan ng maraming Pilipino at malaki na rin ang pinsalang dinulot ng mga ito sa ating likas yaman. Nababahala na ang maraming mamamayan sa kanilang kaligtasan at sa kanilang kabuhayan dahil sa sitwasyon ngayon ng West Philippine Sea.
In our international relations, we have faced challenges to our territorial sovereignty, and we will assert our rights and interests in the same fair and pacific way that we have always done.
Ginagawa ng gobyerno ang kanyang makakaya sa pamamagitan ng National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea at ang kanyang mga area task forces sa Palawan at Zambales. Ngunit dahil kaunti pa lang kanilang mga assets para sa pagpapatrol, kinakailangan ng suporta ng buong bansa para maproteksyonan ang West Philippine Sea. Bayani ka sa WPS. Kabahagi ka sa aksyon para ipaglaban ang karagatan, karapatan, at kinabukasan.
Ayan. Thank you everyone for listening and watching our video on the West Philippine Sea. So, ibalik ko na yung floor to our organizer, to our host. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Fritz. Not only was that an insightful presentation, but it was also very inspiring one. Thank you, Attorney Fritz, for highlighting conservation efforts on the ground and sharing with us how to effectively mobilize different stakeholders to protect and ensure the sustainability of the environment, particularly the West Philippine Sea. So I know our participants are already raring to ask their questions, but I would have to ask you to hold on to them for a while. At this juncture, we now move to the most interactive part of our forum, the panel discussion. So, Jam, how do we go about the panel discussion?
Oh, okay. We have invited representatives from the academe and national government agencies to talk about the role of law and policy in ensuring the sustainable management of coastal and marine resources, how their institutions can be empowered for conservation governance, and the various legal and policy mechanisms necessary to address current conservation challenges.
So, our first reactor from the government sector, Mr. Joaquin Rogelio B. Silvestre, is a senior science research specialist at the Ocean Environments Task Force of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources Biodiversity Management Bureau. Mr. Silvestre, you now have the virtual floor.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, yeah, so we got to touch on two presentations. First was from the UPM laws on the valuation framework for the West Philippine Sea, and then the works of Tanggol Kalikasan in the West Philippines. So we'd like to discuss some of the programs of the DNR regarding the West Philippine Sea in particular, of course, given our mandate to establish and manage the National Integrated Protected Area System uh, towards the possible establishment of marine protected areas in the West Philippine Sea. While we understand that this is not a one-size-fits-all solution for the conservation and protection of key biodiversities in the West Philippine Sea, what we're doing is supporting the science for us to really know and understand kung ano po ba yung actual na and appropriate strategies for us to protect the significant habitats and the biodiversity in these areas. So from 2016 or 17 to present, we've been partnering with the University of the Philippines, the Marine Environment and Resources Foundation, to support marine scientific research in the Kalayaan Island Group, to assess the many different areas that have previously been visited in the 1990s that have to be regularly and consistently monitored, not just for not just in recognition of the presence of foreign entities that damage these ecosystems, but also for other natural and human exacerbated threats such as climate change, which can affect both the biodiversity and the ecosystem services that these ecosystems provide. So these marine scientific research expeditions, these biodiversity surveys, eventually hope to give us an overview, not just an overview, but a very clear picture of what resources we have in the West Philippine Sea and what we actually need to protect and how best to protect it, whether in the form of a single a large marine protected area or multiple marine protected areas that are networked into one. So we are in touch with our researchers from the University of the Philippines to really determine what will be appropriate. We're also looking uh, at strengthening partnerships with other sectors. So in recognition or in line with the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the new global framework for protecting biodiversity, or protecting, conserving, and managing biodiversity globally. So the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework recognizes that traditional conservation initiatives alone are not sufficient to really be able to protect biodiversity significantly until uh, for in the long run rather. So we are looking at other ways that or other strategies which achieve conservation benefits secondarily. So these are called other effective area-based conservation measures, and which are basically sort of strategies that secondarily protect biodiversity. For example, one rather clear or simple example are military reservations. While their intent and purpose is not for conservation because of the, let's say, restricted access, biodiversity is secondarily conserved or protected. And one another key discussion item earlier was the Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System. And looking at the comments, I think I'd have to agree with one of the comments which mentions that ecosystem valuation is good, but also there are some threats to it. So ecosystem valuation has to remain a tool for us to use, not to really determine how to protect, how to really manage biodiversity and our natural resources and sustainably develop these resources. One of the ways we can really prevent this kind of threat of this valuation information being used against our natural resources is to, of course, increase the role of science in the governance of our environment and natural resources. So, one of the programs the DNR is doing to support this is to establish marine scientific research stations, which will serve as a repository of the knowledge and information that we gather through our scientific activities, through our research into and for this information to be accessible to all and to be used uh, for formulating policy recommendations, management recommendations from regulatory agencies alike to communities that would like to better manage or protect their natural resources. But also not one of the challenges with the implementation of the PENCAS. We know that the PENCAS already has an implementing rules and regulations. One of the challenges for the Philippine government would be to on how it will operationalize the PENCAS, meaning existing operational capacities of the department, for example, may not be enough to generate the amount of data and information, even technological capacities might not be enough to actually store this information for it to be used in the actual implementation of the PENCAS. So these might not be enough. So there has to be corresponding efforts to increase or improve this capacity as well. So the DNR is in coordination with the Department of Budget and Management to ensure that there are sufficient positions to for the DNR to be able to perform the functions that as stipulated in the PENCAS Act. And again, of course, can't we can't emphasize any further, the role of science in policy making and implementation. So we understand there's a sort of a lack of appreciation for science, and there is much to do to make it more effective. So what science can do is it can limit the role of politics in very political decisions, such as, let's say, limiting fishing activities or closed seasons. So when we have the science to tell us na ganitong panahon nangingisda yung itlog, kaya ganitong panahon dapat hindi tayo naghuhuli ng isda, then we are able to make science-informed decisions and science-informed policies that the people can trust. So eventually, so this is one of the roles we envision for our marine scientific research stations, that there will be transparency in the science and data that is generated in managing our coastal and marine environment and biodiversity, and that this data is can be monitored by the normal citizen and can be viewed in as a means to review decision making at top, middle, and lower levels of management. And of course, when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, we understand the presence of foreign entities in this area. We are again part of our work is to make sure that the rich biodiversity in the West Philippine Sea is known to the world. So we know what we are losing in terms of climate change, in terms of illegal activities in these areas, and so we can implement strategies or science-informed and appropriate strategies for the rehabilitation or protection of the environment and biodiversity in the West Philippine Sea. That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay. Am I heard? Okay, once again, thank you very much, Mr. Silvestre, for providing us with some useful insights from the point of view of the government. Now we would like to hear from our next reactor, Dr. Irene De Vera, Professor 6 at Pangasinan State University, who will give insights from the perspective of the academe. Dr. De Vera, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to, of course, read my reactions on, or my response on existing legal and policy regime for marine resource valuation, assessment, and accounting in the Philippines, given earlier by Attorney Riali. For the strength of the said topic, the Philippines has, of course, progressive laws such as the RA 11995 or the PENCAS Act. Of course, this institutionalized ecosystem and natural capital accounting. For the RA 8550 as amended, or the Philippine Fisheries Code, this mandates sustainable use and valuation of fisheries. For the RA 11038 or the INIPAS Act, it requires resource assessment in protected areas. For RA 9729 called Climate Change Act, and of course the RA 10121 or the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act, it recognized ecosystem-based approaches. For policy efforts such as the Philippine Development Plan, Blue Economy Roadmap, and State of the Coast reports integrate marine ecosystem values into planning. For the observed gaps and issues, of course, the DNR, BFAR, LGUs, PCSD, and PSA have overlapping roles in marine valuation. So in short, harmonization is limited because, of course, shall we say, fragmentation of mandates of these agencies. Another is absence of standard valuation protocols. There are different methods used in EIA, fisheries stock assessments, protected area plans, and damage evaluation, resulting in inconsistent estimates. Another is weak enforcement in marine areas. Although valuation framework exists, enforcement against IUU or of course, our unregulated and fishing regulations and habitat destruction and coastal reclamation is inconsistent. Another is limited integration into budgeting. Valuations are seldom translated into public investment decisions or compensation schemes. Geopolitical constraints. In the West Philippine Sea, enforcement and accounting face challenges due to territorial disputes and restricted access. So what are the implications? Of course, without harmonized valuation standards, data from marine accounts may not be comparable across sectors. Second, fragmentation dilutes accountability, risking underestimation of marine ecosystems through value. Missed opportunity marine resource valuation should directly inform fisheries management measures, MPA funding, LGU coastal plans, and even diplomatic positions. So what could be the recommendations? One is develop uniform valuation guidelines under PENCAS for marine ecosystems and services like fisheries, carbon, coastal protection, tourism, and others. Second, institutionalize data sharing agreements among PSA, DNR, BFAR, and LGUs. Third is strengthen enforcement mechanisms so valuation is backed by compliance, like integrating valuations into penalties and compensations. Mainstream marine accounts in planning and budgeting, especially under the Philippine Development Plan and climate change expenditure tagging. And the fifth is, of course, the leverage valuations for WPS diplomacy, showing the tangible economic and ecological stakes of marine assets. So for the comment, the Philippines, of course, already has a strong laws from PENCAS to Fisheries Code and INIPAS that provide a foundation for marine resource valuation. The challenge is not the absence of law, but lack of harmonized standards, data integration, and enforcement. To move forward, government should operationalize a single valuation protocol under PENCAS, strengthen interagency coordination, and ensure that marine accounts directly inform national budgeting and WPS policy. For the multi-sectoral approaches toward conservation and environmental justice presented earlier by Attorney Fritz, of course, for the government sector, we have this policy and regulation, of course, enact and enforce laws like PENCAS, Fisheries Code, INIPAS, Clean Water Act. Budget and planning integrate conservation into national and local development plans, while law enforcement strengthen anti-IUU fishing patrols, coastal law enforcement, and biodiversity monitoring. Maybe the academic and research institutions, of course, they are expected of knowledge generation, like of course such as SUCs like PSU, UPLB, or UPMSI and others, Of course, they provide ecosystem assessments, valuation studies, and climate impact research. Capacity building, train LGUs, communities, and law enforcers on science-based conservation. Policy advice, of course, this has to be translated or translate research rather into actionable recommendation for government. Civil society and NGOs, community mobilization. Of course, we have to organize fisher folks, IPs, and youth for participatory conservation. Advocacy and watchdog role. Ensure accountability in resource governance. For service delivery, support alternative livelihoods, eco-enterprises, and conservation programs. For the private sector, a sustainable business practice, of course, but should be adopted. Like, of course, adopt CSR and ESG measures, reduce marine and land-based pollution. Financing conservation, invest in reef insurance, blue carbon credits, and ecotourism. Partnership with LGUs and NGOs, or co-manage resources and provide livelihood support, the very tangible livelihood support. Local communities and indigenous peoples, traditional knowledge, of course, is needed. We have to integrate indigenous practices in marine and forest management. Engage in community-based coastal resource management and protected area patrols. Of course, these are direct stewardship, and of course, the equity and rights like assert tenure and access right to ensure environmental justice. For international and regional cooperation, of course, cooperate on migratory species, climate adaptation, and marine enforcement. So, of course, we have to consider these are something of cross-border agreements. Funding and technical support, like, of course, TAP GEF, Green Climate Fund, ASEAN Partnerships, and others. Perhaps we could also tap the IUCN. And the diplomatic leverage, use international law to protect marine sovereignty and biodiversity. Of course, we have to integrate integrating environmental justice. So ensure fisher folks and IPs benefit from resource management, not just bear restrictions. Compensation and redress, provide remedies for communities affected by environmental degradation or resource robbing. For participation, of course, we have to institutionalize mechanisms for marginalized groups in decision-making bodies like PAMBI, fisheries, and aquatic resource management councils. Intergenerational responsibility policies must uphold the constitutional right to a balanced and healthy or helpful ecology. So further statement is that conservation cannot succeed if done by one sector alone. Government must enforce, academia must guide with science, NGOs must mobilize, the private sector must invest responsibly, and local communities must be empowered as stewards. Environmental justice demands that those who rely most on nature, our fisher folks, farmers, indigenous peoples, have both voice and benefit in conservation policies. So, of course, the final recommendation, of course, this is a shared responsibility. And of course, we have to really the justice issue should be addressed, and so that benefits, of course, will be fairly distributed. And that's all. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Dr. De Vera. So the floor is now open for questions from our participants. So we would like to bring back Attorney Ray Valerialin and Attorney Fritzlin Palmieri, along with other speakers, to answer the question of our attendee.
If you have questions, please use the raise hand function of Zoom and wait to be recognized before unmuting. Also, you could utilize the Q&A function of Zoom for questions, or you could simply type it in the chat box.
I think the Q&A section and the chat boxes have been quite busy already. So I think we can start asking the questions.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
the early bird, ah,
Christian, siguro I can start. I mean, I was looking
ah,
at the questions early on eh. Madami
okay,
siya.
sige. Go ahead. Go
Um,
ahead, Potter.
but I'd like to note a couple of things in the questions. There was a comment on the PENCAS being an executive order. I just like to clarify that point. It's not an executive order, it's already a law. As mentioned by one of the reactors, it's Republic Act number 11995. It it was effective last May 2024. So what was an executive order, as I mentioned in my presentation, was the PINRA. So the PENCAS is actually a good step towards institutionalizing natural capital accounting, since it already has the force of law. And that is also why an implementing rules and regulations is expected to come out, developed, I think, by the PSA, by the DENR. So tied to that remark, the question, let me read it. So, what institutional or legal gaps currently limit the ability of PENCAS to support accountability, and how might these be addressed through cross-sectoral legislation? Uh, so, merong mention ng cross-sectoral legislation. Maybe Attorney Fritz would like to weigh in on that later. But for me, to respond to this question, one of the issues is operationalizing it. So na-mention yan ng ating reactor kanina, um, establishing natural capital accounts is a big feat. It will require resources, it will require people, it will actually require a change of mindset. Since it introduces evidence-based policy making. Uh, so what I think, if you're talking about institutional gaps, that would be first capacity. Capacity of our national agencies to actually gather, hindi pa nga gather, to establish a system to gather important data on this. So that will require infrastructure, that will require investment in that. The next is changing the mindset within these agencies. Kasi magkaroon ka ng sistema, pero kapag yung agencies naman hindi alam kung para saan yung data na ginagather nila, then that might just end up us doing what PINRA did, like data gathering lang siya, but not putting it one step further to develop policy based on that data. Thirdly is so we're talking about national, but we should also look at local. So localization of the data. Localization of that information, in that LGUs might not also have the capacity to appreciate that data and apply it to pass their own local ordinances for the protection and preservation of natural resources. So it's a big ask. Maraming changes yung kailangan gawin, but the PENCAS, I think is a step. Having the PENCAS is a good step towards that direction, but it has to follow through. The agencies have to follow through. So yun yung aking response to that question. I hope it made sense. I'll give it back to Christian siguro, or Attorney Fritz, if you would like to add anything.
Okay, thank you for Attorney Rayeli. Attorney Fritz, do you want to share your thoughts?
Hello, yan, narinig ako, Sir CR.
Yes po.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with Attorney Rowell. How do I pronounce your name? Kasi bagong-bago lang talaga yung PENCAS, ano. So we still have to secure a copy of the IRR, ano, to determine how the PENCAS will be implemented on the ground. So sa ngayon talaga, it's more on, as mentioned by one of the reactors, talagang ano pa siya? Sabi nga ito kanina, nasa saan nga ba yun? Yan, sa primary stage pa lang ano ng implementation. So, marami pa pwede mangyari ano with the PENCAS law. And at least ano with these studies that we have, and similar studies, I know that some participants are also some participants have ano in this webinar, at least magagamit natin yan ano to soon, since PENCAS include data sharing, yung mga information in order to have a database for all this information that we need, kasi nga nabanggit kayo ni attorney na talagang ang hirap pagdating sa court na i-compute environmental damage since we do not have basis for that. Yeah. Okay, so yun lang, since I'm focusing on the questions addressed to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney.
Siguro
Ituloy ko na ba? Or ano?
idagdag ko rin pala,
Go
maybe
ahead.
also it's an approach that we can look into. We don't have to reinvent the wheel on this one. I understand that certain academic institutions have also undertaken research that require gathering of data. For example, working with MSI, MSI actually has a tool for coastal resources. So naalala ko si Doc Lau, pinesento sa amin na meron na silang field guide. And they have been working with state universities to roll out that field guide, wherein it's actually the residents of those local communities who gather the data. Kasi mas familiar sila dun sa lugar nila eh. Kung ano yung resources doon, kung anong isda yung nandun, kung ano yung coral reef system na nandun, kung ano yung mangrove species na nandun. They're very much familiar and, living there they would have the capacity to account for those resources. Maybe it's more of what does the PENCAS require and matching it with the capacity of the local communities. Ganon. We don't have to reinvent the wheel eh. It's really making use of what's already there. So baka mas effective nga yung ganong approach. So anyway, back to you, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Raylene and Attorney Fritz. Jam, would you like to ask the next
Okay,
question?
Okay, let me read the questions addressed for Attorney Fritz. What role should different sectors like government, academe, NGOs, private sector, and local communities play to achieve a balance between ecological conservation and livelihood security?
Thank you, Jam, and to the anonymous participant. So this is actually the focus of our project the Restore WPS, since we understand that different sectors play a different role, and also these sectors have their own respective mandates. For example, the government agencies alone, the agencies are composed of various entities na may kanya-kanya ding may kanya-kanya ding mandato and yeah, that's one of the challenge. How are we going to complement yung mga mandates, mga nito mga government agencies na ito in order to achieve a balance between ecological conservation and livelihood security. So as mentioned, what we did in the study is we convened these sectors, and we also conducted workshops, breakout sessions among these different sectors in order to agree or to share their various expertise, to share what they have so far in relation to WPS, para ma-harmonize namin kung anong mga yon, and to come up with an action plan wherein all stakeholders or all sectors from different stakeholders will be able to contribute towards a single goal. Yun lang naman ang mahalaga. While we have different roles and responsibilities, ang mahalaga yung pagpupuntahan niya ay papunta lang din sa isang objective. Okay, so yun yung amin pong naging ginawa. And as mentioned again by Doc Irene, it's a shared responsibility among these sectors. Syempre may mga conflicts in between, may mga differences, but at the end of the day, what's important is that we were able to come up with a plan that will serve as basis or guide of these agencies in their plans, kasi parang itinama siya for the planning in the next sessions nila. And also for the local government units to incorporate those plans in the respective plans that they are going to approve in the next dun sa kailan ba yun? 2024 for their budget for this year. So yun yung mga role syempre again may kanya-kanya lang, tama ka doon, anonymous participant. Ayan. Okay, so sana nasagot ko yung iyong tanong. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Fritz. So for our next question, Kuya CR.
Yeah, the next question is not from an anonymous participant. So it's from Mr. Jeffrey Losloso.
Mhm.
So his mini essay goes like this. While the PENCAS law seeks to assign monetary value to natural resources, this can be seen as a double-edged sword. There is a risk that this valuation will be used to justify unsustainable extraction by putting price on it rather than conserving. The risk is that once nature has a price tag, it can be viewed as just another commodity, which can be sold, developed, or extracted as long as the economic gain outweighs the cost. So, to Attorney Raywell, how can we ensure that the purpose of valuation is to make the true costs of environmental degradation visible, not to commodify nature for further exploitation?
So I might be out of my depth here. This is an econ. I think this is an econ question. But we did look into this in our research. So if I understand it correctly, it's really the question is really asking uh, whether or not putting in value for natural resources would result in commodification. Um, that would be the case, yes. I agree. I actually agree with this short essay when I was reading it. There is a tendency to just commodify it. So let's say your resources have 100,000 pesos. So all you have to do is to build a counterpart man-made structure that is at that cost and that would meet the requirements and just consume everything else. That can happen. But the thing is, and I think the PENCAS really intends to not let that happen, is that our system should also consider non-use values. It should also consider, so we talk about use values. So sorry, pag mali ako sa econ, paki-correct na lang ako. Pero yung understanding ko kasi, so natural capital accounts can have use values. So it's the market price of a good or commodity. When you say fish, magkano ang fish sa market, magkano ang importation cost, movement cost, etc., etc. And that is in that commodity. But when you talk about natural capital accounts, you also should consider, and I think the PENCAS does consider this, your non-use values. These are hindi siya quantifiable talaga. Ang understanding ko dito, this would include intrinsic and cultural values of these resources. So for example, one of our initial research findings was there are some jurisdictions, there are some countries that actually put a high value, while monetary, it's a really high value on the cultural significance of an ecosystem. So let's say there's a coral reef system that has been used by indigenous groups or communities for such a long time for their livelihood as a place of their worship. Their religion, their beliefs are grounded in that system. And therefore, even if you assign individual values for resources there in that system, you won't be able to capture the religious value, the cultural value of that ecosystem. So, to answer this, and I agree nga with your essay, it's really up to the system that we establish to consider those factors. Kasi yun nga, wala pa tayong sistema. I mean, the PENCAS has recently been passed. But the IRR and the way that our government agencies should approach the valuation is not just the use values, but also the intrinsic and cultural values that may be found in these resources. So, yun ang aking piece. I hope that answered your question, Sir Jeffrey.
Thank you, Attorney Raywell.
Okay. For the next question from Mark Jason Agricola. How can policy advocacy within multi-stakeholder platforms be designed to move beyond rhetoric and result in legally enforceable commitment, especially in contexts where political will is weak? So,
Parang sa akin yata yan, ano. Pero yung earlier question, sasabihin ko sana parang kay Sir Kaning dapat yun.
Baka may INREM na gustong mag-weigh in.
Anyway, to answer your question, Mark J, so thank you for that. How can policy advocacy, ano, syempre marami tayong pwedeng gawin, ano, in order to make these advocacies into more enforceable commitments, ano, kagaya ng aming ginawa in the project, dahil alam naman natin, and this is also related to another question wherein, a participant asked, what are we going to do if the administration ano changes every 3 or 6 years, ano. So the reason why we have drafted WPS ordinance, ano, that we also distributed and submitted to the local government units is for them to translate those action plans into ordinances in order to sustain the plans that they have also identified during the summit. So yun yung isang way, ano, to make this legally enforceable. Another one is also our plan to establish a WPS council, composed of national and local government agencies, the stakeholders or the conveners, ano, in particular, to have this body, ano, na para siyang PAMBI, ano, may magkakaroon ng coordinated system ng mga activities na gagawin nila for the WPS. And we are actually replicating this council, ano, dun sa Philippine Rise that we are also doing at present, ano. So we are planning to have Philippine Rise memorandum of cooperation among the stakeholders naman sa Philippine Rise, but for WPS yun din yung naging plans, ano. And also yung aming plan na magkaroon for the accountability mechanism, ano, magkaroon din kami ng system in order to monitor and also ensure that the local government units will incorporate those plans in their respective yung kanang mga action plans in their plans, ano, na kanilang ginawa for this year. Yun naman, we coordinate with the DILG, since the DILG has jurisdiction over the local government units, to ensure those plans, ano, will be incorporated in the plans of the government agencies. And syempre, another platform is to really incentivize, ano, to provide probably incentives to LGUs or NGOs to recognize their programs or livelihood support for compliant LGUs and stakeholders to make compliance with their plans more attractive, ano, instead of non-compliance. And aside from that is we also another platform is to ensure, ano, talaga yung broad stakeholder ownership nung atin po mga CSOs and academe, especially the academe, ano. That's why we have the Institute of Environmental Governance, and some of them are present in our webinar today. And that's our one way of ensuring, ano, the sustainability of the projects despite the end, ano, of the project life. So we have partner SUCs in provinces across the country in order to make sure that we have the continuous engagement, ano, with those areas despite the end of the project, ano. We still have continuous partnership with the Institute of Environmental Governance established in SUCs across the country. So yun din yung way for us to ensure, ano, yung atin pong commitment and sustainability, especially as you mentioned, ano, in the context where political will is weak. Okay, so sana nasagot ko, Jason, yung tanong mo. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Fritz. So yung next po natin is a set of questions, 4 questions. Basahin ko na lang ng mabilis. So first, in terms of sovereign disputes sa WPS, paano po natin ma-assert ang environmental justice claims kung arbitral ruling na hindi enforceable militarily? Ano ang legal next step para hindi lang siya paper victory? The second question, kung patuloy na mauubos ang marine capital sa West Philippine Sea dahil sa weak enforcement, paano papasok ang intergenerational justice under our Constitution? Maaari bang managot ang Estado mismo for failure to protect natural resources for future generation? Third, Environmental justice requires equity across generations. Pero paano po natin legally masasecure ang long-term marine conservation commitments kung every 3 to 6 years nagbabago ang political leadership at priorities? And last po, ang NRAP, PENRA at PENCAS tools is technical, pero paano po kung may data manipulation or selective reporting ng LGUs para ma-justify ang environmentally harmful projects? May legal safeguards ba against political capture of data-driven tools? So, Attorney Rewell or Attorney Fritz?
Sino una? Bato ulit ako. I can probably start off. Attorney Fritz, please feel free to jump in. But there maraming questions, no? So let's look at it isa-isa. The first question is on the disputes in the West Philippine Sea, particularly on the South China Sea arbitral ruling by the Arbitral Tribunal. Ngayon, it's not a simple answer. But to answer this question, I think we need to have a quick understanding of how international law systems work. They're very much different from domestic systems. So the first one being that domestic systems like the Philippines, for example, follow a vertical structure. So we have, the constitution, and then you have the three branches of government, pababa, and that's where the power emanates from three equal branches of government, and we enforce our laws with that structure. So you have the legislative passing laws, executive, executing the laws in accordance with the will of the legislature, and you have the courts deciding on actual cases and controversies based on actual facts and interpreting the law as may be required. So yan yung domestic system. Ngayon, when you go to the international system, that's where things are a bit unfamiliar generally, because international law systems are actually horizontal in structure. What does that mean? It means that each state is quote unquote equal to each other. Technically, it cannot impose its will over the other state. And even in foreign tribunals, hindi rin yun pwedeng i-impose. That's why certain tribunal rulings, arbitral rulings, kahit na merong award yan ng damages, hindi na i-enforce. It's really about the pressures that you can exert, that the states exert over other states. That's why we talk about sanctions. That is that's the group saying that you have violated international law and standards, and therefore we are pressuring you to follow your international obligations. It's more of, think of it this way, yung illustration ng aking colleague. Ang international law system para siyang barkadahan. So kung 5 kayo sa barkada, tapos may isang gumawa ng mali, ang 4 dapat pressure yung isa para gumawa ng tama. Pero that person will always have the option to not follow the group, because that's how international law systems work. So medyo crude yung example, but that's that thought. So ngayon, to answer the question, hindi enforceable militarily, yes, it's difficult to enforce the arbitral tribunal ruling. But aside from that, wala rin namang award of damages doon. There has been an envy case, Costa Rica versus Nicaragua, wherein the ICJ has awarded damages. But it took a long while for the ICJ to even award the damages, because there were different valuation methods being used by the parties, and in the end, even the ICJ did not use any of those valuation methods. So that's also a difficulty when we talk about international tribunals, in that the standards will be different. So not enforceable, yes, that's correct, but it's really up to the group of nations to enforce it, to find a way to make the state who erred liable. So ano ang next legal step para hindi lang siya paper victory? Now, this one, if we do establish a system of valuation on our end and we do natural capital accounting, I think having that system work will strengthen our position if we do claim for damages in the future. But again, if it's an international tribunal, we'll also end up having the same dilemma of enforcement. But then again, at least we have more basis for our claims. So that's one. Second, we can enforce it domestically. So as I earlier illustrated, uh, uh, our domestic laws, certain provisions provide for penal clauses for penalties in terms of fines, imprisonment for the exploitation of these resources. So if we cannot enforce it internationally, then maybe if our justice system can do it, then we can enforce it domestically. So yun po. Merong nag-raise ng hand. Christian, do we proceed with isa pa lang yung question na yun, ah. Sorry.
After na lang po siguro ninyo, Attorney
Okay. Attorney Chris, do you have
Realino.
anything to add to that first question?
Nothing to add, attorney, explain mo na clearly.
Okay. Yung next ay, kung patuloy na mauubos ang marine capital sa West Philippine Sea dahil sa weak enforcement, paano papasok ang intergenerational justice under our Constitution? Maaari bang managot ang Estado mismo for failure to protect natural resources for future generations? Attorney Fritz, do you want to
Okay,
take
sige.
a first
And then,
crack on this one?
feel free to add. Okay, so siguro ako dun muna ako sa weak enforcement, medyo dun ako na focus, I do not want to say that na weak yung enforcement because as we have seen in the summit talaga nakita namin yung mga initiatives of government agencies with respect to their activities or initiatives pagdating sa West Philippine Sea. Talaga lang maraming mga mga factors but ay hindi ko masasabi naman na weak and wala rin tayong measure to determine yung weak or strong yung pagdating sa enforcement. So yan pero sabi nga kung patuloy na mauubos ang marine capital yan, paano tayo papasok sa intergenerational justice under our constitution and maaari bang managot ang estado yun nga as mentioned by Attorney Realin yung pagdating sa pananagot ng estado una muna kanino tayo mananagot kanino tayo mananagot while the constitution provides that the state has the right to promote and protect a balanced and healthful ecology. Kanino tayo mananagot kaya kanina titingnan ko it should be the other way around baka tayo mismo mga tao yung dapat managot sa estado for our failure to protect our natural resources for future generation kasi remember that as Filipino citizens we are the one tayong involved sa isang estado, tayong bumubuo sa isang estado, so tayo yung pwedeng managot for future generation as to what we did currently pagdating sa atin pong constitution and also pagdating sa intergenerational justice or intergenerational responsibility siguro ito naman yung lagi natin sinasabi under the doctrine in the case of Aposa versus Factoran that every generation has the obligation and responsibility to protect our natural resources for the benefit of our future generation. So again, it's a shared responsibility it's a shared responsibility. Hindi man tayo pupunta mismo sa WPS to help our law enforcement personnel in protecting our sovereign pero we can still contribute by kagaya kanina yung sa pinakita nating AVP you can share your knowledge especially for the students or youth na nandito ngayon sa ating webinar to share and reflect on these initiatives para paano ba tayo makakatulong or saan part tayo pwedeng tumulong kanina nakita niyo yung plans so pwede tayong mag-reflect on those plans and tingnan natin yung expertise natin na pwede natin i-contribute again with the government agencies in order to make sure na itong pong ating sinasabi ng intergenerational justice or intergenerational responsibility ay atin talagang magagawa as Filipino citizens. Yan. So, yan baka may gusto kang idagdag, Attorney Realin?
Yes, Attorney Fritz, I have something to add lang. I agree that we are actually also responsible for anything that happens to our national wealth and patrimony. But of course, we have standing to assert that right. There are legal remedies if and it has been established in the case of MMDA versus Concerned Citizens of Manila Bay, in that there are remedies such as a writ of mandamus. In that case, it was a writ of continuing mandamus. wherein the courts compelled various government agencies to undertake initiatives and activities to protect and conserve Manila Bay. That is one of the legal remedies available. So you can compel. So a writ of mandamus is compelling a government to do a government agency or entity to do their duty under the law. Kaya siya mandamus. There are also protective writs such as the writ of kalikasan under the rules on environmental procedure promulgated by the Supreme Court, wherein if there are threats uh, against resources or the environment involving two or more municipalities, then you can have a writ of kalikasan issued for the protection of that area of those resources. That's one. Another is yung designation of marine protected areas. So we have the laws that would enforce these rights and protect marine capital. But again, it's the laws are just there. But to use those laws, it's really up to us. Dun papasok yung shared responsibility. Because if kahit na may batas ka or kahit na may policy ka that would protect it, if we as citizens not assert and use those laws, then they would be useless. And obviously, we will lose the resources that we already have. Ayun. Okay. Ang hirap ng mga questions.
Someone is raising his hand po. Mr.
Sige.
Mark Jason, are we going? Sige po. Go ahead po. Briefly lang, sir. Sir Mark?
Okay lang po for a voice question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello po, okay lang po for a voice question.
Yes po, go ahead.
Ano nga po, as mentioned earlier, yung in the case of Oposa versus Pactoran, na-create natin po yung doctrine of intergenerational responsibility. Now, my question is, paano po or how might PENCAS be expanded through legislation para include yung doctrine na yon as a measurable legal standard beyond dun sa role ng PENCAS as an accounting framework?
Okay. Would like to answer first? Attorney Fritz, nakamute pa po kayo.
Sorry. Sir Mark, i-clarify ko lang ha. So you're asking if how we can expand the application of PENCAS to protect intergenerational wealth, intergenerational interest. Is that correct? Tama ba? Is to thing.
Ano po? If pwede pong gamitin yung PENCAS as a tool to expand legislation para to include intergenerational responsibility as a measurable legal standard beyond po dun sa role ng PENCAS as an accounting framework.
Ako, and this is my opinion, no? It's not really about expanding legislature kasi, you can't really act beyond what the law provides. But it's really about applying the PENCAS and looking for connections of the PENCAS with other existing laws. So I think this would also answer one of the questions in the Q&A, in that the PENCAS, the objective is accounting and valuation. Okay, so that kumbaga yung output ng PENCAS, yung expected na output ng PENCAS mo. You don't expect the PENCAS to actually do the protecting or the enforcement of NVI laws. Kasi ang output mo lang dyan is the data, the accounting of the resources, the data, and the value of those resources. And if you gather that over time, you're establishing a baseline for those values. You're establishing a baseline for these resources. And over time, you can see a change, whether decrease or increase of those resources. Ngayon, so yun yung i-expect mo sa PENCAS. You don't expect it to enforce anything other than that. Ngayon, meron ka ng laws. You have other laws. I mentioned a couple, like the Fisheries Code, the NIPAS Act. If you look at those laws closely, meron kang penal clauses. Those penal clauses would state that fines will be awarded. And the fines that will be awarded will be based on the studies or the valuation system. Ngayon, kapag wala si PENCAS, how will the agency or the courts then interpret that? That it will be based on scientific studies, it will be based on valuation. If you don't have PENCAS, then the court will just, it might be an arbitrary number, it will require experts to be presented during court proceedings, hindi magiging uniform siya across different courts until the Supreme Court might, standardize things. But the fact that there's already a PENCAS, the PENCAS addresses that probably vagueness in the provision, or that room for interpretation, because you already have a valuation system. You already have a system that would dictate how much was lost or how much is needed to restore that loss. So ngayon, meron kang PENCAS complementing, not expanding, but complementing existing laws based on the provisions that they already have. Another example which I didn't provide for kanina, but one that I have been thinking of since these two laws came out, is the Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act and the Maritime Zones Act. So, ang archipelagic sea lanes, we have designated sea lanes under the UNCLOS. So, we have, as an archipelagic state, we have to establish archipelagic sea lanes. That's one of our obligations under the UNCLOS. If we open sea lanes for passage, so innocent passage, then we are also opening ourselves to potential damage, di ba? So, pag may dumaang ship, baka sumadsad sa coral reef, baka lumubog, that can cause damage. Ngayon, if you don't have PENCAS, then how will you determine the exact damage caused by that grounding or that oil spill? You see, that's how the PENCAS works, I think. It should work that way, in that it will centralize all the information needed for us to claim, for us to enforce our laws, all the other laws, to be more effectively enforced, and to reduce that arbitrariness when claiming for compensation. I think one of the reactors also mentioned this, no, na minsan pagdating sa valuation, since wala tayong sistema, mahirap mag-assign ng value. But if PENCAS is implemented well, then that would actually address that issue. So I hope that actually answered your question. It's not much expanding, but more of enforcing the existing laws and the implementation and the enforcement.
Okay po. Thank you. I understood.
So
I
yun.
get the point po. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Attorney Fritz, may additional pa po kayo o okay na po tayo?
Okay na.
Okay. So unfortunately, we have to cut short yung ating very fruitful discussion. Jam?
Okay, I think my last question lang po,
Okay.
I think all the participants are asking if they can have the copy of the presentation.
Okay
It's
po.
okay lang po.
Okay,
Yes.
okay lang naman. I mean, yeah.
Okay po.
Just
Thank
for
you
your
so
support.
much. Okay po. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who submitted their questions and actively participated in our open forum. Again, due to our limited time, we can only accommodate a few questions. For those we could not address, we will compile them and share our responses via email. If you would like to engage with us, feel free to message the UPLB-INREM Facebook or LinkedIn page or send us an email.
Okay, at this point, we would like to present the certificate of recognition to our dearest panelists. So allow me to read the citation first. The certificate of recognition is awarded to Mr. Joaquin Silvestre for serving as a panelist during the policy forum titled Legal Approaches to Conservation, Setting the Policy Context for the Sustainable Management of Coastal and Marine Natural Capital in the Western Philippines, organized by the UPLB-INREM, held on 29 August 2025. Signed, Dr. Juan M. Pulin, Founding Director of UPLB-INREM, and Dr. Sevi Camacho, Junior Chancellor of UPLB. So once again, thank you very much, Mr. Sylvester, for sharing your insights and being one of the reactors.
Thank you.
With the same citation, we would also like to present the Certificate of Recognition to Dr. Irene De Vera for being one of our panelists and sharing her insights from the perspective of the academe. Thank you so much, Doc Irene.
Okay. And lastly, we would like to take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to our distinguished speakers. On behalf of UPLB-INREM, we are honored to present the Certificate of Recognition to Attorney Raywell Realin for sharing his invaluable knowledge and expertise in his presentation titled Existing Legal and Policy Regime for Marine Resource Valuation, Assessment, and Accounting in the Philippines. So we thank you for serving as a resource person for the Policy Forum organized by UPLB-INREM this 29 August 2025. So also signed by Dr. Juan Pulin and Dr. Jose V. Camacho. So once again, thank you very much, Attorney Realin, for being an important part of today's success, and we hope for more collaborations with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
With the same citation, we would also like to present the Certificate of Recognition to Attorney Fritzlyn Palmieri with her presentation titled Multi-Sectoral Approaches Towards Conservation and Environmental Justice. Thank you very much, Attorney Fritz, for serving as one of our resource persons in the Policy Forum. Let's give our speaker. Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Let's give our speakers and panelists a virtual clap.
And now, to bring our forum to a close, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Canesio D. Predo. So Sir Caning will provide a synthesis of today's forum, highlight the key takeaways, and deliver the closing remarks. Sir Caning, we look forward to your insights.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for attending this very exciting forum. So the presenters highlights the urgent need to align conservation law with natural capital accounting in safeguarding the West Philippine Sea, recognized as a vital ecological, economic, and cultural resource. The WPS provides food security, livelihoods, and ecosystem services that extend beyond conventional economic measures. So the discussion underscores three key objectives. The first one is establishing shared recognition of the value of nature in policy making. Second is critically assessing existing legal and policy frameworks to identify strengths and gaps in marine resource management. And third, fostering collaboration among government, academe, and civil society to ensure inclusive and actionable conservation strategies. So with the distinguished legal experts, Attorney Rewell and Attorney Fritz, and representatives from the academe and the government agencies, Dr. Irene and Mr. Silvestri, they contributed and their insights as well. The discussion centers on how legal instruments can be strengthened and complemented by evidence-based policy-making tools such as natural capital accounting, and then addressing challenges such as resource depletion, marine disputes, and climate change. The forum positions itself as a platform to deepen dialogue and co-create governance pathways that integrate ecological, social, and economic dimensions of sustainability. So overall, this forum aspires us to transform policy discourses into concrete actions that protect the marine wealth of the West Philippine Sea for present and future generations. A specific highlights of the forum given by Attorney Rewell, he introduced a brief background on the Reinvest program at the outset, and then specifically on the role of Project 3, which is the legal and policy arm of the program. He covered how natural capital accounting can be a tool for natural resource management and conservation, and the institutionalization of the PENCAS law and the execution of the national initiatives such as INRAP and PINRA in the Philippines. So aside from that, he also discussed how PENCAS law and different existing policies can become a tool to become who is liable for environmental damages and how those damages can be compensated for. The second presentation by Attorney Fritz covered how Restore West Philippine Sea project championed the multi-sectoral approach for sustainability of our coastal and marine resources and livelihoods that depend on it. She provided details on the different strategic approaches and action plans Restore WPS has done that focus on key sectors involved with the West Philippine Sea, along with the ways to move forward. The grassroots and the community-led initiatives demonstrate that conservation is most effective when it advances both ecological sustainability and social justice. So at this juncture, I would like to thank you everyone for attending this meeting. So as we come to close this policy forum, I would like to extend on behalf of the project team, I would like an INREM, UPLB-INREM, I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to our distinguished speakers, Attorney Rivel Realin and Attorney Fritzlin Q. Palmieri, and our panelists, Mr. Silvestri and Dr. Irene De Vera, and the participants, of course, for sharing your time and expertise and insights. Our discussions today made it clear that the West Philippine Sea is more than a contested space. It is a living system that sustains our people, our economy, and our cultural heritage. By bringing together perspectives from the legal sector, government, academe, and civil society, we have taken an important step towards a more integrated and inclusive approach to marine conservation. We were reminded that laws and policies provide the foundation for governance, but they are most effective when informed by science, enriched by values, and supported by collective action. The conversations on natural capital accounting further highlight the importance of recognizing the full value of our ecosystems, ensuring the decision made today protect not just our resources, but also the rights and opportunities of our future generations. So let us leave this forum with a shared commitment to continue collaborating across sectors, to push for policies that balance conservation and development, and to amplify the voice of nature in our all decision-making spaces. That means that making invisible visible in the decision-making process. So may this event serve not as an end, but as the beginning of a more meaningful partnerships and concrete actions toward the sustainable management of our seas, particularly the West Philippine Sea. So on behalf of the organizers, thank you once again for your valuable contributions. Together, let us carry forward the momentum we built today toward a future where the West Philippine Sea remains abundant, resilient, and protected for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sir Kaning, for giving us the synthesis of this highly informative and exciting forum, and for giving a compelling closing message. And that concludes our online policy forum. But before you leave the meeting room, we would like to remind everyone that only those who complete the evaluation form will receive a certificate of participation. The QR code is displayed on your screen, and the link to the evaluation form will also be sent in the chat box. Thank you very much, everyone. And once again, I am Jamela Arizapa.
And I am Christian Ray Bundia, your Masters of Ceremony. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon and happy weekend.